Tonight, China pledges to stop building new coal mines abroad. Will this one sentence rewrite the rules of global warming? We're 5 weeks out from the Glasgow COP26 conference, and in the last 5 hours, the dial has shifted. More money from Joe Biden for the Climate Change Fund, more promises from China on power. What difference will all this make? Also tonight. Party games, Keir Starmer attempts to change the rules on how Labour elects its leaders. Is this designed to lock out any future candidate from the hard left? We debate. And in the second part of our series looking at extreme heat, we're in Australia, which has seen firsthand the devastating effects of soaring temperatures.
I'm worried for my future. I'm worried that this house won't be here in another 5 years.
Hello, good evening. All eyes were on Washington tonight as the US President met the UK Prime Minister for talks. But like the best sleights of hand, the real news was coming from New York, where, in a recorded address, the Chinese president told the UN General Assembly of China's commitment to stop the building of any new coal plants abroad. The move comes after pressure from John Kerry, President Biden's climate envoy, and will not be enough to satisfy many who want China's green pledges to start at home. And yet, the scale and the speed at which China, the world's industrial superpower, moves means that one sentence from Xi Jinping could change forever the market in fossil fuels and literally limit the world's temperature. We'll be talking talks and trade deals in a moment as we assess the strength of the Washington bilateral. But first, Nick Watt is here with this breaking news. Just explain what was said, Nick.
Well, Emily, there have been nerves at the build-up to the COP26 conference in November in Glasgow has all been a bit pedestrian. And then today, two potentially big moves by the two most important players on climate in the world in the two areas that really matter. So China on emissions and the US on climate finance. So from Beijing, that commitment, as you say, from President Xi, no new coal plants overseas. Important to say, no commitment on no new plants within the People's Republic of China. But it is a big move that potentially kills off the international finance of coal. And optimists would say this shows that China is really serious about climate change, because if we get more global warming, if the glaciers melt in the Himalayas, then there could potentially be no water in China. The second big announcement obviously was from the US, from Joe Biden, and he was taking the developed world closer to a target set way back in 2009 in Copenhagen, which is that there should be an annual transfer of $100 billion from the developed to the developing world, mainly to help them deal with the adaptation, dealing with existing climate change. Now, there was a view that if we didn't get that done by COP26, the conference could be in trouble.
This is pretty good news coming out in the space of a few short hours. Now, what's the reaction been like here? Well,
of course, the UK is chairing COP26. Boris Johnson has responded to that Joe Biden announcement, absolutely delighted with it. The view is that we're not quite there yet on that $100 billion target, but we are in touching distance with it. On the Chinese announcement on coal, this is seen as a big step. It's seen as a turning point that the main international financier of coal is walking away from that. But let's just look at these caveats. China still runs more than a half of world coal. Number two, they would want to see more from China on how it's going to reduce its domestic coal use, and more on what is known as the NDCs, nationally determined contributions, how they will reduce carbon emissions across their whole economy. But certainly the view tonight is big momentum ahead of Glasgow, big momentum on the two big areas, coal and cash.
Nick, thanks very much indeed. Well, we'll have more on that in a moment. But first, David Grossman has been taking a look at how the relationship between the UK and the US has been playing out in Washington.
The United Nations had got used to American presidents turning up for a fight.
I have the honor to to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Donald Trump.
We can no longer be taken advantage of or enter into a one-sided deal where the United States gets nothing in return.
But in New York today, the UN heard a very different message.
We're back at the table in international forums, especially the United Nations.
The world thought it knew what it was going to get from a Biden presidency, not least Britain.
Mr. Biden, a quick word for the BBC.
The BBC, I'm Irish.
Conventional wisdom had it that the 46th president would be antagonistic, perhaps even marginalise the UK.
My reading of the Biden administration is that it's a lot more pro the UK and a lot more pro Boris than sometimes people give it credit for. I think we're seeing really close cooperation where it counts, where it matters.
There is at least one area of cooperation that didn't exist under President Trump.
You knew I was going to bring it up. Climate change. He's great on that. And he wants to cut CO2. He wants to get to net zero.
The UK is about to host the UN climate conference in Glasgow. Both the UK and US administrations need it to succeed.
I think the climate issue is one of the things that differentiates President Biden so strongly from Trump. And the fact that he is now pushing hard for an ambitious deal at the Glasgow summit, promising more money for green infrastructure in developing countries, is a real boon to the Prime Minister. There is still, I think, a lot of work to do to come out of that Glasgow meeting with a success. But having America shoulder to shoulder with Britain definitely increases the prospect we'll get a successful outcome. Good news for the Prime Minister.
But other areas may not be as straightforward for the US-UK relationship. In New York today, the President outlined his big theme, of which the pullout from Afghanistan, however chaotic, was emblematic.
We've ended 20 years of conflict in Afghanistan. And as we close this period of relentless war, we're opening a new era of relentless diplomacy.
Asking for partner help on Afghanistan, in Iraq, all those kinds of things took up so much time, energy, space. I think the hope of what I heard from Biden today, certainly my personal hope, is that energy and time and space gets used for these diplomatic challenges, because there are so many of them.
Although the president didn't mention China by name in his speech, it was clear he had the struggle with China in mind during much of what he was saying.
The future will belong to those who give their people the ability to breathe free, not those who seek to suffocate their people with an iron hand.
It's not like the Soviet Union when it was the evil empire. All of our countries need to work with China. And so it's a much more complicated approach than in the past. It's a more nuanced approach, and it's difficult to define, and it's certainly hard to explain to the public what you're doing and why you're doing it.
But competition with China could negate UK and US efforts in other areas.
We shouldn't underestimate that America is changing. Their focus is moving towards China and the Asia-Pacific area, and they have less time and attention for European security. And over the longer term, that's going to become an issue for the UK.
The UK-US post-Brexit trade deal now looks as far away as ever, and President Biden has raised concerns about the UK abandoning the Northern Ireland Protocol of the Brexit deal with the EU.
The Northern Ireland issue is important not just to Biden, but it's important to the U.S. Congress. Nancy Pelosi, the head of the House of Representatives, as you know, was here. The Speaker of the House of Representatives was here just the other day, and she also was saying that we may not sign a trade deal with the UK if we're not happy with with what's going on in Northern Ireland. So it isn't just Biden; it's Congress. It's many Americans who have, feel very emotionally attached to Ireland.
I think the Boris administration has got its work cut out in terms of persuading the Biden to see its point of view on a number of things, not least the Northern Irish Protocol. I think other governments have been much more effective at making their views known in Washington.
As the two leaders meet in the White House this evening, the UK-US relationship has clear tensions and challenges, but there seems to be a level of engagement that few predicted when Mr. Biden took office.
Well, that was David Grossman. Joining us now, Dan Hannan, Conservative peer and member of the Board of Trade, and Brendan Ball, the Democratic congressman who sits on the influential Ways and Means Committee. First of all, though, we start with Sarah Collinbrander, Director of Climate and Sustainability with ODI Global. Sarah, can you put this China announcement into context for us? Is this a game changer?
I think it confirms that the end of coal is now in sight. We've seen investment trickling out of it for some time. Private sector finance has been slowly withdrawing as the economics of coal has changed. Until recently, since 2013, Japan, South Korea and China have provided over 95% of international finance for coal. But China was really the big player there. It provided twice as much as South Korea and Japan combined. South Korea and Japan both pledged to end international finance for coal earlier this year. And so China's announcement is the final nail in the coffin for coal.
So what will people do? I mean, in terms of what that gap leaves in terms of power now, if that's all over the developing world, what will replace it?
So this is not necessarily a commitment to close down existing coal-fired power plants, but to meet on new demand and growing demand from most of the emerging and developing world with much cleaner sources. And the specifics of that will vary from country to country: geothermal, hydro, wind, solar. But the technical feasibility and the commercial viability of renewables is now competitive with coal, not to mention all the wider benefits like bypassing the horrific air pollution so often associated with the era of coal-fired power.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Let's pick up then with Brendan Boyle and Dan Hannan. Just on this issue, first of all, if we can go to you, Congressman Boyle, if the aim was to move the dial on climate change between these two leaders today, that has worked. This has been a successful meeting, hasn't it?
Well, great to be back with you, Emily. And yes, and coming into this presidency, I looked at climate change as probably one of the main areas where President Biden could work with European leaders, including the British Prime Minister and the British government, and replace what obviously had been a very antagonistic relationship between Donald Trump and most of our allies. The reality is, if we are going to, while this is a controversial issue here in the U.S. domestically, it isn't worldwide with respect to climate change. And if we are going to make the ambitious goals of the Paris Climate Accord, we frankly have to accelerate our efforts.
Yeah. Dan, I was reading, you wrote, I think, just last July, is it worth decarbonising the rest of the world if the rest of the world won't follow? You were standing in Derbyshire at the time. I guess now the answer is yes, it is worth it. If China is really stepping back from future financing of any new coal mine, then that puts the boot right back on all of our feet as well, doesn't it?
It certainly makes a big difference. China is responsible for about 28% of all global carbon emissions. And of course, with the best will in the world, we've made very substantial reductions already. We're less than 1%. So this has to be a global effort. That's not to say that, you don't do anything. Obviously, somebody has to move first. You can't say that no one should do anything as long as one country is holding back. But it does mean, I think, that we should approach it in a business-like way, in a transactional way, in a hard-headed way, not in a kind of millenarian spirit of assuming that this is just a sort of test of your virtue. And I think Boris and Joe Biden are doing that. I think they are looking at ways in which we can make the change affordably and proportionately and in line with market principles.
When you talk about transactional, Brendan Boyle, the one thing that isn't there, and we know won't be there this trip, is any work on a free trade deal. Boris Johnson said he recognised the US president had bigger fish to fry. Now, won't that always be the case with Britain? I mean, how do we make a case for that trade deal if there are always bigger fish to fry?
As you know, I serve on the House Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over trade issues. We have no planned meetings on any sort of prospective US-UK trade deal. President Obama then 5 years ago famously said that any consideration of a bilateral trade deal would go to the back of the line or back of the queue, as you would say. The reality is here, and that's no disrespect to the UK, it's just a reality of so many other competing priorities for us in Congress. Even on trade, certainly our relationship with respect to China, with respect to implementation of the USMCA, our biggest trading partners, Canada and Mexico. right now those issues do take precedence. And again, that's not because of any slight of the UK. It's just a practical reflection of size and the extent to which we trade with these countries.
Dan Hannan, we are literally at the back of the queue.
I'm sure there will eventually be a trade deal. The economics all point in the same direction. A million Brits work for American-owned companies. A million Americans work for British-owned companies. We are each other's largest investors because of all the obvious commonalities of language and common law and accountancy systems and all the rest of it. I think that there will probably be a rethink in Washington about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I think that the UK and the US will be partners there.
Do you mean part of this deal? I mean, there is talk tonight of a sort of piggyback deal with the Mexico-Canada arrangement. Tell us, is that possible from where you're sitting, Brendan Boyle, that the UK could enter into that deal?
I serve on the committee that would have to vote on it, and I can tell you I haven't heard one word about that. I mean, it is just not a subject that ever comes up here. It does sometimes in the context of Northern Ireland. Aside from that, though, frankly, it's just not an issue that ever comes up.
I have to say, I'm obviously speaking to different people in Washington from the congressman. I've had a lot of conversations on both sides of the aisle about this, and I've come across a lot of enthusiasm in both chambers. I mean, obviously, there are distractions at the moment. We had this wrecking ball coming in of the coronavirus, but
hang on, Dan. But Brendan Boyle sits on the committee. You would have to vote on it. If he's never heard of it and if it's not on any of the talks or any of the agenda this week, then presumably he would know if it was coming round the corner.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I heard the congressman giving an interview a few months ago talking about whether the UK trade deal would come before or after the EU one. So it's obviously not something that he's never thought about. And by the way, on that, there shouldn't be any competition. I mean, I want there to be a US-EU trade deal. I want us to have rich neighbours. I want the EU to prosper. I want Ireland to prosper. You know, the best outcome for everyone is that there should be a general global removal of trade barriers. It's not some kind of beg your neighbour thing.
Yeah, I'll say this. I mean, speaking first, so people understand right now, and when I say right now, I mean literally the next 10 days, these are some of the most important votes on domestic issues that I will cast as a member of Congress. Some of those include climate change. Really, the totality of the entire Biden domestic agenda is coming right down to the wire. So that here is frankly crowding out any other sort of topic, any sort of consideration of any of trade deal, that's for sure. That having been said, though, let me say this. I'm someone who believes strongly in the transatlantic relationship. I've been concerned at the way the West has been divided over the last 5 years. I think anything we can do to get Europe, the UK, the United States back on the same page would frankly benefit us all.
And when you talk about Europe, the UK and the US, where does the positioning of Joe Biden, who always calls himself an Irishman when he's asked about the UK relations, where does the Northern Ireland Protocol fit into all that?
Yeah, so this just isn't a controversial topic here, as you know. I mean, we've made it clear, going back to June of 2016, just how important preserving the Good Friday Agreement is to us. I accompanied Speaker Pelosi and 10 of my colleagues when we went to 10 Downing Street and communicated this message several years ago and a former prime minister ago. There has been no change in that. And just recently, I was part of a letter in which 36 members of Congress from both political parties, from progressive Democrats to conservative Republicans, wrote to the British Prime Minister to show our continued interest and concern as it relates to the Irish peace process.
Dan Hannan, do you sense there is a kind of, I don't know if you'd call it a naughty step period, that the UK government has to prove that it understands how deals work before another one comes along?
Do you know, I've never really understood why people think we need to be lectured about keeping the peace in part of the UK. I mean, who has a greater interest, who has a greater incentive than we do in the prosperity and stability of Northern Ireland? And it's been one of the things that's been going on for as long as I can remember, that you know, Irish American lobbyists like the congressman feel that kind of we need to be told to do this. I mean, if you think of how much turmoil and how much bloodshed we suffered there, we have more interest than anybody in preserving peace and stability.
I guess, Brendan Boyle, the question is, does the president understand that Northern Ireland is part of the UK? You know, if it was you exporting to Hawaii, you'd have a different feeling about this.
Yeah, well, so first, I'm a member of Congress, not a lobbyist. Second, it is quite clear that an active American presence was needed in the 1990s and throughout the last several decades to ensure we had an even-handed treatment of both communities in Northern Ireland. I have been very concerned that some have spoken in a breezily, even dangerous way when it comes to the Good Friday Agreement, even some talk in some circles about scrapping it altogether. So I happen to think that the U.S. presence here has been good over the last 30 years. Certainly, former Prime Ministers Tony Blair and John Major have also communicated that. And either way, it is going to continue.
OK. Thank you both very much indeed. Thanks for joining us this evening. Well, President Biden says he'll be announcing additional targets around vaccinating the world at a summit in New York tomorrow. As part of his speech earlier, he said the US had delivered 160 million doses to other countries, but that more needed to be done. Newsnight has seen exclusive stats from UNICEF, which the organisation says shows the UK could give millions more doses to poorer countries every month, as well as supply booster jabs to those who need them. Seema Kotecha has more on this, and she's at the wall for us. Seema.
Emily, we know how fast COVID travels. We've spent months trying to maintain a distance, wearing masks, working from home, all to keep it at bay. But it still manages to cross borders, and that's why medical experts say global vaccination matters. In some parts, the vaccination figures are high. Here in the UK, 65% of the population has been fully vaccinated. In the United Arab Emirates, more than 80% have. In the US, more than half of the population has been fully vaccinated. And in Singapore and Denmark, more than 70% have had their full dose. But only 2% of people in low-income countries have received at least one dose of their vaccine. In Angola, just 5 out of every 100 people have had a single dose. In Nigeria, that figure falls to just 2 out of every 100. There are multiple factors here at play: vaccine hesitancy, logistics, manufacturing delays and storage, to name a few. So the level of take-up isn't just down to availability. But of course, some of it is, with some poorer countries simply not having sufficient supplies. Over the summer, Uganda, Bangladesh and Trinidad and Tobago reported running out of vaccines. Now Newsnight has seen exclusive data gathered by UNICEF that shows the UK could fully vaccinate 100% of its population over the age of 16 and still have 90 million surplus doses by the end of the year. The analysis, based on a supply forecast and population breakdown, shows that the UK government could share up to 20 million doses a month in 2021 and still meet targets for booster doses to the immunocompromised and over 70s. Joanna Rea is the Director of Advocacy at UNICEF.
The priority needs to be getting this vaccine to vulnerable people all around the world. And that's in everybody's interest to do so, because that's how we end this pandemic for everyone for good. So it's in our interest to make sure that countries around the world have this vaccine, because that is the fastest way to end this pandemic for everybody. The UK has had a really successful domestic rollout. So it's now in a position where it can continue that here in the UK. And at the same time, it has enough surplus vaccines to donate more and faster to countries that need them around the world.
The UK has already committed to providing 100 million doses to poorer nations over the next 12 months. So UNICEF are calling for an extra 11 million or so a month. But this week, Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the booster programme was his priority. He said the UK has made huge contributions to global organisations, bringing vaccines to those who need them, but that protecting the vulnerable here was his focus. However, the World Health Organization has urged wealthier countries to suspend booster jabs until vaccine uptake is higher in poorer countries. Tomorrow, President Biden is expected to urge other leaders at the United Nations General Assembly to do more, with White House officials saying he's going to inject a fresh sense of urgency against the pandemic. Experts believe 11 billion doses are needed to achieve global immunity to the virus. Country leaders look after their people, and as nations attempt to bounce back after a turbulent 18 months, donating to those who are still in the midst of a medical emergency might not be on the top of their priority list.
Seema, thank you very much. Now, Keir Starmer has promised to rewrite the rules of who gets to vote for the Labour leadership and move away from the system that allowed Jeremy Corbyn to flourish in 2015 and under which Starmer himself succeeded last year. In a gamble that may prove very contentious ahead of the party's conference, he'll aim to reduce the hold that grassroots members have on the party and boost the power of MPs and trade union members, a format that brought Ed Miliband to lead the party over his brother David. The changes will make the election of a leader who's beloved of members but not of MPs much harder, a tacit intention perhaps to lock out the hard left. One former Corbyn ally called it a wrong-headed backward step. Well, Nick Watt is back with us. Nick, just spell out what this actual change would be.
Well, Emily, tonight there is talk on the Labour left of civil war after Keir Starmer announced those three proposed changes. So firstly, there's changing the way you elect the leader. Come to that in a second. The second change is to make it more difficult to deselect Labour MPs. And the third one is more difficult to flood the Labour conference with motions that could change party policy. But as you say, the big one is the leadership election change. And what he wants to do is bring back the electoral college, which would significantly increase the say of Labour MPs. So there are three elements to that old electoral college, each with a third of the vote. Firstly, the Parliamentary Labour Party, that's the MPs. The second one is trade unions that pay the political levy and affiliated societies. They would have one member, one vote, no block vote. And the third is the membership of the Labour Party. Now, Keir Starmer says that these are sensible changes to rules that make the party look inward-looking. The view on the left, this is a stitch-up to prevent a repeat of a Jeremy Corbyn leadership.
Will he get this through?
Well, I spoke to two members of the Shadow Cabinet tonight who you would think would be well disposed to Keir Starmer. One of them rolled their eyes and said to me there are much more important things to be thinking about. Another one thought it was a big mistake and they think that he won't get it through. So tomorrow at midday there's a meeting of the body that liaises between the Labour Party and the trade unions. That's known as TULO. It's not a formal vote, but if there's trouble there, then it would mean that he would struggle to get it through the National Executive Committee that meets ahead of the Labour conference, and they would have to approve it. These sources are telling me that they think that two trade unions that are well disposed to Keir Starmer are not wildly keen about that. That's the GMB and that's Unison. I spoke to one person who knows the mind very well of Angela Rayner, the deputy leader of the Labour Party. This person said their personal view is that this is mad and it's anti-democratic, and they would be very surprised if Angela Rayner supported it. I have to say a deafening silence from her today on this one. The view in the Keir Starmer camp, no guarantee of success on this one, and they are willing to be flexible. They could potentially reduce that third size of share of the vote to the Parliamentary Labour Party. I was talking about the trade unions. No great surprise that the Unite trade union, under a new General Secretary, Sharon Graham, not keen on this. She had said that she wanted to focus more on workers' rights, but let's listen to her talking to our colleague Ian Watson.
I really think this is an error. Absolute error. Anybody listening to that, you know, one member, one vote, being spoken about at Labour, they'll probably reach for the remote and switch it off, because why would anyone be interested? At this point in time, Labour needs to focus on what's happening to workers and communities. Now, we have a policy on one member, one vote, and we will discuss that policy with the delegation. But what I said in the letter, which I think is the most important paragraph, is why are we talking about rule changes in Labour in a crisis?
Sharon Graham will join us now to discuss this. The former Labour MP and member of Labour's National Executive Committee, Laura Pidcock, and the Labour MP, Ben Bradshaw. Welcome to you both.
Hello,
Ben, you just heard a source telling Nick that it was mad and anti-democratic. And Sharon's saying, why would you pick a fight like this just on the eve of conference?
Well, I don't know who these anonymous sources are, Emily, but what I think Keir is trying to do, and I haven't seen the detail, I'm not privy to the detail, is to ensure that the Labour Party, under his leadership, is a party that looks out to the country, out to the public, and is not constantly inward-looking and involved in faction fighting. The current system hasn't worked. It makes sense, in my view. MPs know the candidates well. They work with them over years. They know their strengths. They know their weaknesses. To return to the tripartite foundations on which our party was founded. Trade union members whose influence would increase under these proposals, as I understand it, to a third. They represented less than 20% of the votes in the last three leadership contests. So it would increase the influence of ordinary levy-paying trade union members, a third to MPs and a third to members. I think that makes sense.
Laura, you have to admit, the last system has not delivered you to power, has not delivered you to government in any shape or form for a long time. Surely that's got to change.
Well, the delivery of power isn't about giving MPs more say in who is the leader of the Labour Party. It is really bizarre to hear somebody arguing that members should have less say and that MPs somehow have this special talent at knowing who will make a fine and brilliant leader. The people in our party, the members in our party, are also members of society. They are the teachers, doctors, nurses. They are the people who clear our rubbish from the streets. They are doing really important jobs in society, and it is absolutely up to them who should elect the next leader of the Labour Party. Can I just give a bit of context? The political context of this is that working class people are struggling in so many different ways. The cut to universal credit, the national insurance tax hike.
Let me just bring you back. Let me just bring you back.
Into a conference, Emily, to go into a conference proposing this kind of rule change is utterly preposterous, because there are a dedicated group of people around Keir Starmer who actually just want to shrink the space that members have to participate.
Okay.
You introduced it as a whole that grassroots members have. This is about what participation
let me bring Ben in.
Members have in our political party.
Is this fundamentally about locking out the hard left so you can't get a repeat of Jeremy Corbyn? Is that at the back of Keir Starmer's mind or the front of Keir Starmer's mind?
No, and that, I think all those issues that Laura quite rightly talked about, the challenges facing working people, the huge challenges facing the country, they will be the main issues of debate at this party conference. I think this is an attempt by Keir Starmer to reinstate the system that served our party.
Let me bring in Laura.
It was a system that lasted the longest time in our party. The tripartite system of trade union members.
Let me just bring in Laura, because it's harder when you're outside. Go on, Laura.
Yeah, Ben's been in the party a long time, and he knows that this is not a fight that the left of the party wants. This is not a fight that the left of the party has asked for, nor has repeatedly been asking for the former leader of the Labour Party's whip back, which is not normal to just not give the leader of the Labour Party the whip back.
So Ben's point is that you're just returning to what did work.
What we should be concentrating on, I'm sorry, I'll just finish this point. It is really hard to decipher who's talking. What they want to do is talk about the intense crisis that working class people are facing. And the right are so obsessed with what happened under Corbyn and ensure that doesn't happen again. They will shrink the democratic participation of members.
Yeah.
Sadly,
I don't think it's the right, but it's Keir Starmer bringing it in.
Laura managed to lose a safe Labour seat to the Tories. I've held a former Tory seat for 25 years by being open to the public, talking to the public. But the public tell me, not just Labour Party activists and members, but the public tell me the sort of person they want to be the Labour leader and the Prime Minister. I'm interested in winning power so we can deliver this for the sort of people that Laura is talking about, not permanent opposition.
Can I just ask you, Ben, if he doesn't get this through, and he's meeting with the unions tomorrow, and they should be beneficiaries from this, but even they're not on side, why is he doing this?
Well, that rather belies the claim from some people that this is a stitch-up. I don't know whether he'll get it through. I'm pleased he's trying, because in the end, I want a Labour Party leader who has principles, who has values, who wants to make the Labour Party electable so we can actually deliver for the working people of this country, which is what Keir Starmer wants to do, and that's what he thinks this system will deliver.
The rules that elected Keir Starmer would contradict what you've just said. You know, this is about, why should my vote count less than yours? Why should ordinary members' votes count less than yours? And this is really about subverting the democratic process. We treat members currently in the Labour Party like second-class citizens. There is a culture of fear, there is a culture of nervousness around what members can and can't do. And these are hard-working people trying to hold this government
let Ben respond
to account.
To that,
unlike the people proposing this
it's not
silly
about
rule
anyone's
change.
vote counting less than anybody else. This is about Keir Starmer trying to ensure our party, rather than doing what we're doing on the television now, arguing amongst ourselves, looks out to the public, becomes relevant for the public, and is attractive to working people so we can win an election and deliver for those
All right.
people.
Thank you both very much indeed.
That's
Thanks
what
for
we
coming.
want.
Thank you. Good. Good to end on that note. Now, at the heart of that UN summit in New York we began with lies the red-hot issue of climate change. Tonight, we bring you the second in our series looking at life at 50 degrees. Australia now has 6 times more days of extreme heat than it did 30 years ago, and 2021 is set to be one of the hottest years on Earth. Tonight, our film, made by our colleagues at BBC Arabic, shows just how the country and its people will be affected.
Temperatures will climb well into the 40s.
It was extremely hot and everyone was starting to get worried day by day until it happened.
Whoa, kangaroo! Okay, it's coming this way. Should I get the other pump going? What can I do?
The fire was just too intense and out of my control. And if India had been in earshot at the time, I was wanting her to get into that fire shelter and just give up. It's over. We've done the best we can.
Oh no. No.
It did get really intense and I thought we were going to lose the house. But it just calmed down for a second and the fire kept going up the mountain.
Imagine this is going to be like this for a long way down the road.
Oh yeah.
It has completely and utterly changed the landscape here for the rest of my life, if not forever. As far as any of the tall trees, mostly all of them have been wiped out.
It was the hottest day ever recorded in the Sydney Basin. Incredibly, the mercury rising to almost 49 degrees.
Because population increase in Sydney is continuing, it's spreading out west. The Australian dream, where you had your half-acre or acre block and your own house, this Australian dream could become basically Australia's nightmare. You need a car to actually get from your house to work, because we're also not providing work where you live. You have to commute. Also, there are no shops. People living indoors, I mean, you don't see anyone outside. I don't see any kids playing outside. They even put black roofs on top of these houses, and then they built them so close together that you have no more space left to actually put trees in, which is crazy when you think of the next 20 or 30 years, where we know it's getting just hotter out there. In Australia, we're producing our energy to the large proportion by burning fossil fuels, meaning we're producing more CO2 by having all these air conditioning units running high flat out. But there could be simple changes made, and these changes relate to materials. One of the projects where we are demonstrating change is the Cool Roads Trail. Let's take the heat stress trackers, put them out in this cool street, and collect some measurements on this stinking hot day. This yellow concrete is only at about 60 degrees, so nearly 10 degrees cooler than the asphalt just out on the road, which made it at about 70 to 72 degrees. It's quite interesting. They removed all the bitumen, and you can see the different surface materials, bringing in the verges, planting more trees. So I think it's a great idea.
You're not allowed in there, Ted. Out the fridge.
I just chase down these trees to give these bats some water. I don't know what to do, honestly, because they're suffering in this heat, and they've gone further up in the tree. But this one died, and we've had many that have died.
So when it comes to flying foxes, 42 is sort of life, the universe, and everything. Beyond 42 degrees, mortality increases substantially.
This is what climate change looks like, ladies and gentlemen.
An international report has Australia last when it comes to policies that protect the climate, trailing countries like Russia, Iran and China.
If he said we were doing better than anyone else, he must have looked at the table upside down.
Our goal is to reach net zero emissions as soon as possible, and preferably by 2050.
I'm worried for my future. I'm worried that this house won't be here in another 5 years. And I'm worried that no one really cares enough to do anything.
And we'll be bringing you more films from Life at 50 Degrees C over the coming weeks. You'll be able to see the short videos on iPlayer and the BBC YouTube channel. And the series culminates in the week of COP with an hour-long edition of This World on BBC Two. But that is all from us for tonight. No papers, I'm afraid, but we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.